This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
"53 people killed in an early morning road accident in Cameroon." South Africa approves the compassionate use of drug Ivermectin for COVID-19 patients. Calls for cooperation dominate the World Economic Forum, but how will African nations survive the economic devastation of COVID-19? Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live this. British telecom giant Vodafone eyes ways to trim its debt. And Egypt offers a string of waivers on debt interest payments to boost its tourism sector. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. In our top story, the death toll from a traffic accident in Cameroon's western region has now risen to 53, with 29 other people injured during the incident. The tragedy occurred in Sanchu village. The crash took place in the early hours of the morning. Police report that a 70-seater bus collided with a truck carrying fuel. The ensuing flames partially burnt both vehicles. The regional governor said many of the bodies could not be identified. And to some big news coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo now. Parliament has been voting in the last hour on a motion of no confidence against Prime Minister Sylvestre Ilunga. The vote could force the government's collapse and mark the final death blow to a coalition that President Felix Tshisekedi formed with his predecessor, Joseph Kabila, 2 years ago. Well, our correspondent, Chris Ochamringa, has been keeping an eye on developments in Kinshasa. He joins us now. Chris, what is the latest in these impeachment proceedings against the DRC's Prime Minister?
Well, Lindy, Prime Minister Sylvestre Ilunga has been impeached by MPs in the DRC. There were 367 MPs who voted to impeach him. They cited a number of failures on his part. They mentioned the insecurity in the country, corruption, the failure of the government to pay public servants in time, and they also mentioned that the DRC is a country that is very rich in natural resources, minerals, but most of the vast majority of the population are living on less than $1 a day, which is, they said, was unacceptable and has to change because the government of the Prime Minister had promised that they are going to improve the lot of Congolese people who have been suffering for very many years. And so the Prime Minister had to take the blame for this because he's the leader of government business. Now, what this means, the censure of the Prime Minister Sylvestre Ilunga, is that his cabinet, which is composed of 65 ministers, will have to step down, and then a new cabinet will be formed. Now, this is a major victory for President Felix Tshisekedi because he announced last year that he wants to form a new government known as the Sacred Union of the Nation, because he said that the coalition government that existed before, which he entered into with his predecessor Joseph Kabila, was not beneficial to the Congolese people. And so he ended it last December and said he will start the process of forming a new government. And this is part of that, power struggle that President Tshisekedi and his predecessor Joseph Kabila had. It all started after the elections in 2018 when President Tshisekedi was declared the winner of the election, but did not have a parliamentary majority. The majority was from a coalition headed by former President Joseph Kabila, known as the Front for FCC coalition, which had more than 300 MPs. And so what that meant was that President Tshisekedi was pretty much a lame duck president. He couldn't push through his reforms. And so last year he decided to break that coalition. And so this is a major victory for him. Lindy?
Significant changes in the works. Thank you so much, Chris Ochamringa, joining us there live from Kinshasa. And of course, he has confirmed that the Prime Minister Ilunga has been impeached. Now, Wednesday was day 3 of the World Economic Forum, dubbed the Davos Agenda. Since the opening session on Monday, leaders have been calling for cooperation to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. They say no nation or region can overcome it alone, a message that has particular resonance for Africa as the continent's leaders urge richer nations to support the equitable distribution of vaccines. Well, now let's bring in Churchill Ogotu, the head of research at Genghis Capital, for more perspective on this. Churchill, thank you so much for joining us, of course, via Zoom here in Nairobi. Now, the World Economic Forum is taking place at a time when many African nations have had their economies ravaged, not only by the spending needed to fight the pandemic, but of course the shutdowns that have hit revenue streams. In your view, what is the way forward for poor countries on the continent, considering that the pandemic is still with us?
Thank you for having me on the show. There are a few overarching themes that the poor countries in Africa needs to put into consideration. The first one is the issue to do with data. This is one of the sticking points in this part of the world, whereby either there is a delay in release of data or there's no adequate data release at all. So, and that now increases the odds of having some policy mistakes in response to issues, be it even with the COVID pandemic. So as we gradually come out of the pandemic, we need also to ensure that we have timely and adequate data so that it can also influence the policy decisions. Secondly, is also to address the social vulnerabilities. We're at a point whereby with the COVID-19 fallout, it has increased the unemployment rates in Africa, and also the human capital has quite been deteriorated. Looking at things to do with education, most of the poor households in the continent are not able to even attend some of these online meetings. So that is by itself telling us that a few years down the line, it will have even an impact in the inequalities between Africa as a continent and also the developed world. So there should be measures to be put in place to address those social vulnerabilities. The last one is, of course, now to ensure that there are some targeted policies to specific sectors. Right now, most of the budget or most of the policy decisions has been oriented into the investment or capital investment policies at the expense of consumer production and those things that are beneficial to the poor households in the continent. So going forward, there should be a tweak in at least ensuring that there's a balance towards consumer production, which will also benefit the African households.
Yes. And Churchill, there seems to be now, of course, in response to the new variants of COVID-19 that are emerging, there seems to be something of a dilemma that many countries in Africa are facing. On the one hand, countries want to restrict travel to control the further spread of COVID-19. But on the other hand, they're hoping for recovery of travel and tourism industries. In your view, what's the way out of this predicament?
Yes, as you've correctly put it, that's a delicate balancing act. The measures that have been put in to contain the pandemic has clearly gotten in the way to meaningful recovery of some of the sectors. But having said that, looking at this year, at least against the backdrop of the rollout of vaccine, at least there's some optimism, not only in the continent but across the globe, that finally there could be some easing in the containment measures. But having said that, and looking at the continent in general, at the start of the pandemic, there was this outsized view that pandemic will be quite acute in the continent. That has not panned out, and we are seeing that there's this psychology in the continent that we did not bear the full brunt of the pandemic. So I think that by and large, people have let down their guard, and I think that even with the rollout of the vaccine, people might not have that demand. On one hand, there'll be that supply. of the vaccine, but on the other hand, there could not be even the demand for people to voluntarily go to take those vaccines, and that will be an impediment going forward. So I think that by and large, the way out is for the pandemic to clearly fade out that risk, and that will also open up the sectors that have clearly been impacted by the pandemic.
Churchill Ogotu, thank you so much for your time this evening. Now, South Africa's Health Products Regulatory Authority has approved the compassionate use of the so-called miracle drug Ivermectin for COVID-19 patients. But the protocols around the drug are yet to be decided. There have been growing calls in recent days for the drug to be allowed to be administered for medication. Health authorities have been reluctant to approve its use in the absence of comprehensive clinical trials. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
In a small victory for pro-Ivermectin lobbyists, South Africa has overturned a decision to ban the drug to treat COVID-19. Health authorities made it available for controlled use after impassioned pleas by doctors.
We want to be able to do something to stop this now. We've got no time. You can't say, oh, wait until the vaccine and then we'll see for the trials. In the meantime, let us even help those few that we can help legally. We're not saying it's a miracle drug. We're saying give it to us as an option to put into our arsenal to fight this war against this tiny virus that's ravaged our lives across the world.
The decision in December to ban the medicine primarily used to treat animal parasites, however, gave rise to a booming black market as many desperately tried to save loved ones.
I did not purchase myself. I was in isolation. A family member did purchase it for me, so I cannot actually tell you where the drug was purchased. I definitely did take a gamble. However, I was very skeptical about taking it. I had that tablet lying with me for at least 2 to 3 days before I consumed it.
Like for many others who've gone this risky route, the decision paid off.
Took the first tablet on day 5 of testing positive. Within 12 hours of taking Ivermectin, I saw a huge improvement. On day 7, I took another dose of Ivermectin, and by day 8, I was up and about, back to my normal self, no symptoms, no effects of COVID.
Civil rights group AfriForum has welcomed the decision, but will continue with legal action to make it more widely available.
If we get a favorable ruling, that can actually open the door for doctors to have it available to use. We do not have to import it. It can be compounded locally. And that is one of the stories of hope, we believe. You know, it will not take time for Ivermectin to come here. So we can actually very quickly have Ivermectin available for doctors to prescribe to patients.
There's still limited data around the effectiveness of Ivermectin to treat COVID-19. South Africa's Free State University is preparing to undertake a clinical trial. Until the vaccines arrive, Ivermectin may be the only hope for thousands falling ill every day. Health authorities are still to provide clarity on when and how it will be administered. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
African countries do have the ability to transport COVID-19 vaccines, this despite some logistical challenges. Now, that's according to a representative from the World Health Organization, Dr. Rudy Eggers. CGTN's Enoch Sokolia spoke to him about how Africa could rely on existing facilities to roll out vaccines.
Africa is set to acquire vaccines through a number of initiatives. The global COVAX facility has secured close to 600 million doses for the continent.
The vaccines will then be distributed to those countries that have applied, and the country itself makes a prioritization: who will get the vaccine first, how much vaccine will be given, which parts of the country will get it.
COVAX is led by the World Health Organization and the Gavi Vaccine Alliance. The initiative aims to equitably distribute COVID-19 vaccines across the world.
So COVAX provides for 20% of the population.
Surely 20% is limiting when you look at the population of most African countries.
The problem is that there's not that much vaccine availability, and the main interest that WHO has is that there's equity, that all people, all countries of the world actually have access to some vaccine. The problem is if one country takes all the vaccines, then the other country will get no vaccine.
countries have been placed into two groups depending on their financial strength.
So the first group, actually, they will be provided with donations, the vaccine, including Kenya. The COVAX facility will be a donation. Other countries that have got more financial means can also apply for that vaccine, but then on own cost. They will have to procure it themselves.
With variants that are even more contagious emerging, the race to acquire the now precious COVID-19 vaccines is on.
So I think almost all countries have applied. I don't have the exact figures, but almost all African countries have applied that are eligible.
The African Union has also secured 270 million vaccines doses for distribution across the continent. But it is not just the purchase of vaccines that poses a challenge for Africa. There is also the challenge of transporting some vaccines, like the Pfizer vaccine, that must be kept at the extremely low temperature of -70 degrees Celsius. Dr. Eggers, however, says there are other options for Africa. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine can be kept at standard refrigerator temperatures of 2 to 8 degrees Celsius.
Most of the COVAX countries actually prefer the more regular vaccines, the vaccines that can fit into the regular fridges and the regular cold chain, because all countries have got a cold chain. They're running their normal vaccine programs. I don't have a doubt that a country such as Kenya will be able to distribute the vaccines. I mean, we give vaccines every day to children all the time, so the ability to do that is there.
In the meantime, Dr. Eggers is encouraging African governments to try and acquire more vaccines for their people. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Nigeria has now confirmed cases of the COVID-19 variant first identified in the United Kingdom. Nigerian health authorities say samples collected from 4 individuals tested positive for the variant. Here's Digi Badmus with more.
Given the frequency of travels between Nigeria and the United Kingdom, there had been warnings that it was only a matter of time before the UK variant of COVID-19 was found in the country. And that's exactly what has happened.
In the last 1 week, we've had 3 reports of the UK variant of interest, the B117 strain, found in individuals that had left Nigeria and went to 2 other countries. And so once they were tested, this new strain was found among them within a week of returning from Nigeria. This was reported to us through the international health regulations. And it's most likely that these strains were acquired in Nigeria.
The head of the Nigeria CDC says the 4th individual with the strain was discovered after genomic sequencing was conducted on several samples taken locally.
So we're going to keep intensifying our genomic surveillance to look out for more of these. It's difficult for us to scale rapidly. Sequencing is a very complex endeavor. But we're working with our partners now to scale our sequencing. There are 3 institutions that have significant sequencing capacity in Nigeria.
Nigeria has been recording an increased infection rate in the past weeks. Health authorities suspect the new strain of the virus may be partly responsible. The country is hoping to receive its first batch of COVID-19 vaccines in the weeks ahead. Initial inoculations will give priority to healthcare workers.
The daily reports of increasing numbers of health workers being infected in the line of duty with fatalities is highly disturbing. This is further depleting our grossly inadequate human resource for health. Our prioritization of health workers is therefore to protect them so that they can safely care for the rest of us.
Nigeria is exploring all options to secure safe and efficacious vaccines to meet our target of covering 70% of our population within 2 years, 40 in the first year, 30 in the second year. With an eye on value for money, we are negotiating with various parties and planning for flawless execution using all our recent experience from the polio eradication, all in the face of a global competition and, as some say, scramble for vaccines.
Last week, the government approved funding for the construction of oxygen production plants. Demand for medical oxygen has been increasing with the surge of COVID-19 patients. Authorities have also introduced rapid diagnostic test kits to ramp up testing. Despite the seeming severity of the second wave of the pandemic, the government has ruled out lockdowns in the near future. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
We come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
It's day 3 of the World Economic Forum, and the focus is on global concerns such as clean energy and a sustainable bioeconomy. Earlier, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for increased climate financing to address issues of adaptation and resilience. Guterres and the African Union chairperson Cyril Ramaphosa urged developed countries to honor their Paris Agreement commitments. CGTN's Daniel Arab-Moy has more.
Many African nations are already suffering the consequences of climate change, a warning of what's to come if action is not taken. Droughts and floods are becoming more frequent and intense. Warmer seas are fueling storms, especially in the southern part of the continent.
Beyond COVID-19, there is perhaps no area of human endeavor that requires common global action more than our response to climate change. It is essential that we each honor our commitments under the Paris Agreement to combat climate change with a specific focus on the means of implementation, support, and adaptation efforts.
Climate experts say that just like COVID-19, climate change impacts could easily play out disproportionately across the world, worsened by long-existing inequalities.
Every country, city, financial institution, and company needs to adopt credible plans backed by intermediate goals for transition to net zero emissions by 2050 and to take decisive action now to put themselves on the right path.
The UN Climate Change Conference COP26 this year is expected to agree on rules for carbon trading. World's largest emitters are also expected to commit to more aggressive national targets to protect the environment. Daniel Arab-Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced a new international coalition to tackle the impacts of climate change. In a virtual address to the Climate Adaptation Summit, Johnson said the UK is partnering with the United Nations and 5 other countries, including Egypt and Malawi. Yasser Hakim looks at the reaction from Cairo.
Cairo has welcomed the results of the Climate Adaptation Summit. According to the UK, the newly set up coalition is aimed at turning the commitments on climate adaptation by the UN into action on the ground. Egypt, a member of the coalition, has its own set of climate change challenges.
Egypt faces several issues. First, the rising level of seawater, We can see that clearly along our coast. Secondly is desertification. Third is biological diversity and the migration of animals and people. Fourth is food security. The weather change negatively affects agriculture and crops, which is important to take note of. Finally is water scarcity, which is exacerbated by the Renaissance Dam.
Dealing with these crises requires costly preventive measures.
The agenda should include how we can control the rising seawater levels by building water barriers. Egypt has built a few, but it's expensive and need more. For desertification, we need to reduce the crops that are affected by global warming and increase other types of crops, and also change our irrigation strategy to reduce water consumption.
Experts say for the climate coalition to be a success, there must be a collective effort between government, the private sector, local communities and funders. Support should target low-income nations. They have contributed the least to the climate crisis but are the most at risk from its fallout. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Russia's lower house of parliament has approved a 5-year extension of a key nuclear arms pact with the United States, known as the New START Treaty. The White House did not immediately confirm the deal, but it did say that President Joe Biden had discussed the issue on Tuesday with Russian President Vladimir Putin by telephone. Our correspondent Stuart Smith has more from Moscow.
It's one of the few treaties that still exists between Russia and the United States after many of them were torn up by President Donald Trump. And in fact, this treaty was tried to be renewed by President Donald Trump, but he had a number of preconditions, a number of new requirements that he wanted to include in the treaty, which Russia said it just couldn't agree to. Coming into this year with President Joe Biden, we knew that Joe Biden was interested in renewing this treaty, and that seems to be exactly what's happened. It's one of the few areas of cooperation between Russia and the US that's going on right now. It's a very important treaty. It restricts the number of nuclear weapons that both sides can have on their territory to 1,550 nuclear warheads each. And the idea of that is to prevent an escalation of a nuclear arms race by each side trying to have more nuclear weapons than the other. This treaty allows each side to monitor how many nuclear weapons the other side has, and also tries to maintain a limit on how many nuclear weapons each side has. A treaty which both presidents clearly feel is in their country's national interest, and perhaps a starting point for future discussions moving forwards.
The Chinese Lunar New Year travel rush will begin on Thursday and is expected to last over 40 days. Because of new coronavirus outbreaks in parts of China, authorities are tightening travel restrictions and epidemic control measures. China's Transport Ministry says around 1.7 billion passenger trips are expected during this period, which is regarded as the world's biggest annual migration. That is an average of 40 million trips a day. This year's number of trips is down, however, by 40% compared to 2019, but up 10% compared to 2020. Meanwhile, the China Chamber of Commerce in Ethiopia has donated COVID-19 protective materials worth close to $300,000 to the country's Ministry of Education. The contribution is aimed at supporting the reopening of schools. Here's CGTN's Daniela Pearson with the details.
The donation ceremony was held at Ethiopia's Ministry of Education in the capital Addis Ababa. High-level government officials were present, as well as representatives from the Chinese embassy. The China Chamber of Commerce in Ethiopia donated 500,000 washable masks and 10,000 forehead thermometers.
Today's donation is a good example for CC's contribution to Ethiopian society. With their contribution, the cooperation between our two countries is not just government to government, but also people to people. And we support each other at all possible levels. Ladies and gentlemen, since the outbreak of the pandemic, China and Ethiopia have been standing together, shoulder to shoulder.
Officials in Ethiopia say that the support is important for schools to better prepare for reopening. COVID-19 related risks could be reduced as more protective materials are made available. The Chinese government, as well as Chinese businesses, have donated several rounds of COVID-19 medical supplies to Ethiopia.
When Ethiopia was hard hit with the COVID-19 pandemic, the first country who stood with us, with Ethiopian government and with Ethiopian people, is the Chinese government and the Chinese people and the Chinese business community in sending medical team in to train our medical personnel in Ethiopia in handling the pandemic and also in provision of medical supplies and test kits.
Ethiopia has recorded the highest numbers of COVID-19 cases in the East Africa region. Over 26 million students have been affected by the closure of schools due to the virus. Some children have been able to access online and distance learning. However, the digital divide is wide, and those in rural areas remain locked out. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. British telecoms giant Vodafone eyes ways to trim its debt. And Egypt offers a string of waivers on debt interest payments to boost its tourism sector.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Well, let's start off with some corporate news. British telecoms giant Vodafone Group is considering options for its Ghana business as it focuses on reorganizing the group and paying down its debt. Now, although the plans are not yet public, Vodafone could sell its majority stake in the unit to Johannesburg-listed Vodacom Group, in which Vodafone is the biggest shareholder. However, the government of Ghana will have to approve any deal. The company recently sold units in New Zealand and Malta, and it is targeting an initial public offering of its mobile mast business in early 2021. Now, Vodafone has been steadily consolidating its Africa interest under Vodacom, in which it holds a 65% stake, selling a minority shareholding in Kenyan market leader Safaricom to the South African company in 2017. And heading to Nigeria now, the country's Monetary Policy Committee has voted unanimously to retain the monetary policy rate at 11.5%. Now, the central bank hopes this will boost consumer spending and help to speed up the recovery process of the economy. Holding the rate will also encourage borrowing, as the lending rate by banks is expected to remain low. Of course, Nigerian inflation is above target and at the highest level in 3 years. A sharp drop in oil prices, the country's main export, and lockdowns at the start of the COVID-19 outbreak has pushed the economy into recession. And still in Nigeria, messaging app WhatsApp is facing a serious dilemma over the introduction of a new privacy policy. It has led to a backlash from its users, with some even migrating to other messaging platforms. Now, the situation has forced WhatsApp to shift the deadline when users are required to accept the policy from February to May this year. Even so, most users still fear the new policy will invade their privacy. And as Deji Badmus now reports, those concerns are no different in Nigeria.
Journalist Onya Dekunle has been using the WhatsApp messaging app for about 10 years now. She's grown so attached to the app, using it for normal messaging and for her job as well. But she says the new privacy policy is making her take a second look at the app as a primary messaging platform.
When I downloaded WhatsApp in the first place, I was made to understand that all my messages are end-to-end encrypted, meaning that basically or literally what happens on WhatsApp stays on WhatsApp.
And she's not the only one.
What this new policy means is that WhatsApp will be able to share your metadata. They'll be able to share your course location. Your business owners who you chat with will be able to know more about you. So I think it's quite intrusive. If this policy comes to play finally, such apps would gain full access to our information, which I think it's really not good.
WhatsApp has sought to play down on any potential risk of the new privacy policy, but not many have been convinced. Quite a number of users have migrated to rival messaging apps. Folashade says she has not arrived at that point yet, but would not hesitate to do so if WhatsApp does not provide a more convincing explanation.
I'm still on WhatsApp because definitely it's the largest messaging platform. But if I feel that a certain app would be too intrusive, I think I'll need to check out other options.
One of the problems with the design of most apps' privacy policy document is that it is usually very lengthy and curated in a legal language that most users find difficult to fully understand and so don't bother to read them at all. Onyi says that's exactly what happened to her when she received the WhatsApp new privacy policy.
You usually don't have time to sit down and start reading, okay, what are they saying here? So because I needed to do something on my phone at that time, I had just accepted some kind of privacy policy on my phone. So right now, I do not even know if it's this one that everybody is complaining about that I accepted. So that's what concerns me. That's what worries me right now.
ICT expert Rashid Ogunfolajo says the lengthy and sometimes complex nature of privacy policy documents by developers is most times deliberately designed to be so.
So they craft this in such a way that users will be shoehorned into accepting what is beneficial to those companies and not necessarily beneficial for the users. Knowing that we are not going to look at it, users are not going to read the fine line. Nobody has that time. Everybody is always in a rush. You want to just get to where you want to get to.
If WhatsApp was banking on that to push through its new privacy policy, then it appears it is not completely succeeding. And that's why the issue is now one big talking point across the world. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And heading to South Africa now, the government has started a $79.4 million fund, which is aimed at reviving its tourism industry. The Tourism Equity Fund will be used in particular to support black entrepreneurs to start businesses and projects in this sector. Now, the focus on black-owned businesses is part of the government's efforts to improve economic opportunities to those who are discriminated against during apartheid. The cash will come from government, lenders, and the Pretoria-based Small Enterprise Finance Agency. Tourism-dependent businesses have been particularly hard hit during the COVID-19 pandemic as border closures and travel restrictions strangled some businesses. And still in the tourism sector, Egypt is eyeing a gradual recovery after revenues plunged by nearly 70% to $4 billion in 2020, of course, due to the coronavirus pandemic. The country's central bank has extended waivers on debt interest payments for tourist companies and other businesses until the end of June, and that's in a bid to support the ailing industry. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with more details.
The number of tourists visiting Egypt sank to 3.5 million last year from 13.1 million in 2019. This as the pandemic hammered the vital industry. Revenue plunged 70% year-on-year as foreign occupancy rates in Egyptian hotels dropped to just 10 to 15% of 2019 levels. It's this reason that the industry, which accounts for 15% of the national output and is a key source of foreign currency, will continue to receive the central bank's emergency fiscal funds during the second year of the pandemic.
Without the tourism support and the government support to all travel agencies and hotels, I doubt very much that so many people will survive. Accordingly to the Ministry of Tourism in Egypt, we have lots of programs for support for empty hotels and for encouraging the workers in the tourism field to recover and get some of their lost income.
Travel restrictions imposed to curb the spread of the virus have taken a toll on the global tourism industry. Airlines have had to impose strict anti-COVID measures in a bid to comply with the authorities' demands, amid the uncertainty caused by the pandemic.
Egypt, for example, requests PCR tests from arriving and departing passengers, so there's no need for border closures. Egypt has not closed down, and many other countries have also adopted a similar method. But unfortunately, the Europeans have tough travel restrictions. Why do so if a passenger can prove that they are COVID-19 negative? Travel restrictions should be eased, especially with the rollout of the vaccines. It is essential to revive international travel because this will promote trade, business and economics and not just tourism alone.
Europe is Egypt's largest tourist market, and there's optimism a quick vaccination process against the virus can speed up the resumption of travel. However, some in the industry expect recovery to remain slow.
Local travel have increased by 25%, but the average room rate will not be the same like receiving foreigners in same hotels. So it will take some time until we fully recover. I would say 2021 will not be the major year that will return all the losses. We believe in 2023 that the first quarter of 2023 that will give us an indication that the recovery will make something according to the situations that has to do with the pandemic.
Egypt has already started COVID-19 vaccinations this month after approving China's Sinopharm vaccine. The process is expected to make the North African state a safe tourist destination during the coronavirus. But until then, players working in the vital industry still have a bumpy road ahead. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And to Cameroon now, a local bus manufacturing plant is making a name for itself in the transport sector. Sotra Bus created to offer homegrown solutions, now supplies buses to about 10 public transport companies in the Central African region. Here's CGTN's Joy Kiruki Juma with the details.
Sotrabus is the first vehicle assembly unit in Central Africa. It specializes in the construction of 35 to 70-seater buses. Located in Douala, the economic capital of Cameroon, Sotrabus manufactures the skeleton and bodywork of buses. Its founder and CEO explains the idea behind the creation of the company.
We are part of the President of the Republic's emergency plan. We asked ourselves what we could do to put Cameroon on the path of emergency. Thus, we decided to create Strobus because we noticed that many transporters were importing their vehicles. Strobus will thus be able to allow Cameroon to be independent on this issue.
Mbafe says the company is locally financed.
There are no foreign shareholders in Strobus. It is a company under Cameroonian law, and it is 100% financed by the Cameroonians, and I am the boss.
The buses are used by several intercity transport agencies in Cameroon and Central Africa.
I placed the order for a bus and came to see the progress of the work. That's the big advantage with Sotrabus. With imported vehicles, this is almost impossible. It will certainly be necessary to make round trips by plane, and that is excessively expensive. At Sotrabus, we can ask the company during the manufacture of the bus to change parts or things we don't like, and they do it without any problem.
We used to buy imported buses, but these buses were already used and they made us believe that they were brand new ones. This made us lose a lot of our customers. It is fortunate for us that a Cameroonian promoter created a bus assembly back here home. Strabus buses are very good quality. There is also the after-sales service, which is very well provided. When you have a problem with your bus, you can go to Strabus workshops and they will do the necessary work for you.
To date, Sotrabus has already manufactured and sold nearly 300 buses in Cameroon alone. The company produces 4 to 5 buses per month. It also employs more than 250 people. But despite the encouraging results, Sotrabus is facing challenges.
We have foreign customers who want to buy our buses, but we have difficulty related to taxes. The materials we import are taxed at the port of Douala. When we manufacture the buses and we have to export them to our foreign customers, they still have to pay taxes in their country. So we asked the government for a favor which will allow us to manufacture and export our buses more easily.
The African market is dominated by imported second-hand vehicles. But that's a trend that companies like Sotrabus are trying to reverse. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
And moving to Thailand now, a restaurant at a Thai hospital has begun serving food dishes that contain small amounts of cannabis. That's after the country removed the plant from its narcotics list just last month. As the first Southeast Asian country to legalize medical marijuana in 2018, Thailand has been eager to capitalize on the multi-billion-dollar industry. Here's CGTN's Dusita Sacker reporting.
Crowds of people eagerly waiting to be seated. It's a rare sight in the age of the coronavirus. At first glance, it is like many other restaurants. But reading the menu, happy dancing salad, giggling bread, the names are contradiction of the times, perhaps bringing customers respite from the emotional toll of living in a pandemic. And once the meal is over, the giggling bread literally delivers as advertised. This is Thailand's first cannabis cafe. Since the star ingredient was added to their menu in early January, they have seen customers increase by 70%.
We want to bring back the culinary traditions of our ancestors who used cannabis in cooking. We try to modernize and adapt recipes to make the food more enjoyable. For some people, it helps with their sleep.
The dishes offered at this restaurant were made possible by changes in the country's drug classification system, which delisted cannabis as a narcotic, allowing state-authorized firms to cultivate the plant. And just next door, the controversial plants are growing at a hospital known as a pioneer in Thailand for studying marijuana and its ability to relieve pain and fatigue. And now begins its transition to the culinary world.
The challenge in cooking with cannabis is controlling the concentration of THC, which is the chemical responsible for the psychoactive effects. But in this kitchen, one leaf here contains around 0.1% THC with a limit of 5 leaves per customer. It is perhaps not enough to get you high, but the chefs here say it's enough to feel its euphoric effects.
Thailand's relationship with cannabis is one of highs and lows. Known for some of the harshest drug laws in the world, Thailand once issued severe penalties for marijuana users. But all that is changing with astounding speed. Thailand has plowed ahead, eager to capitalize on a multi-billion-dollar industry, estimated to be worth more than $500 million by 2024.
We have to think about making use of cannabis not only for medicine, because the market of medicine is quite small. We have to think about the other segment like food and tourism as well.
There's no doubt the depressing state of the economy could do with a boost in tourism. But for now, Thais can munch on these happy meals, each bite a reminder of Thailand's culinary past, a reflection of the country's major strides in cannabis acceptance. Dusita Saokao, CGTN, Prachinburi, Thailand.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but still to come on Global Business Africa, global foreign direct investment drops by 42% in 2020. We'll be looking at the contributing factors to the decline, all of that at the top of the hour. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Ruche. Time for a short break. Your sports news up next.